Today's coffee talk is going to be on the macronutrient fat. We had a little 3-part series that we started last month with protein, fat, and carbohydrates. And if you guys were here for the lecture on nutrition for optimizing your health, we talked about the 3 macronutrients being proteins, carbohydrates, and fats, and the 2 that were the essential ones were going to be your protein and fat. Essential meaning that these are the ones you have to stay alive, okay? And carbohydrate being the 1 macronutrient that we can technically do without. We may not choose to do without it. It may not be optimal for physical performance to do without it, okay? But as far as living a healthy life, you don't have to have that one in there. You can get by just fine without it. So that's what we'll be talking about today. We're talking about number 2 on the list, going to be fat. Then after this, we got a blood drive. All right, so the blood drive will be going on from 10 to 3. All right, if you've signed up for that already, awesome. Thank you for doing that. We've talked about it in class for the last week or 2 that we were going to have this thing. We kind of mentioned a month ago that we were planning on having this. We just kind of got to line it up and stuff like that. But I hope you will choose to donate some blood. It's a very generous thing to do. When you guys hear our story with this stuff and how the gym got here, how we got to where we're at, I've had more than my fair share of blood. The pint, we're kind of going over jokingly, the pints that I've kind of consumed. I mean, I'm probably on vampire level, all right, of amount of blood pints that I've consumed in my life. And I try to get back, you know, I'm sure I'm not back up to the level of how many I've taken yet, but I'll be out there donating today, trying to do the right thing, and you'll save somebody's life. You may never meet that person, but I can promise you'll be having an impact on somebody's life if you're generous enough to go out there and give some blood. Yes, it's probably not the most comfortable thing you're going to do for 20 minutes, but it's not a hard thing to do. And it'll take about 20 minutes, and then you can leave that situation or that day thinking, hey, somebody is going to be alive because of what I just did right there, and that's 100% true. Okay, so I encourage you to do that. Let us know if you need some help signing up, but it'll be here around 10 o'clock to 3 o'clock. All right. I think I've hit some of the stuff so far to do okay. Mm-hmm. Abrie's going to be talking to you more than I will. That's always a plus. Everybody's favorite coach, Abrie Sellers. Here we go. There you are. I should set it up even better.
What, like there
should be like music? A walkout song, just like kicks through the door. She probably deserves
it. All right, guys. So last time that I got up here, we talked about protein. So today we are talking about fat, like Nick said. We can also refer to those as lipids. So we can start by saying what is fat, and in the most general sense, because I don't want to draw the chemical compound version of that. It's fatty acids and a glycerol backbone create these fat molecules. So we can say that the types of fat are going to come in 3 forms: polyunsaturated, monounsaturated, and saturated. Now, those are going to be from least to most stable, and that's saying, okay, that's their consistency or room temperature is kind of the easiest way to say that. So when you think about, and I have them listed here, when you think about foods that fall into those categories, I want you to keep in mind that any of these foods also have a blend of these in here. So they're not going to just be polyunsaturated fats. They might have some mono and some saturated fat within these foods. And this goes across the board. But the dominant player in this group would be polyunsaturated. The dominant would be monounsaturated. The dominant would be saturated. Just like whenever we talk about protein, how there's a little bit of protein in a lot of things. Does that make sense for you guys? But you're going with what's dominant in that food. So what does fats do for us? Well, they're a fuel source. And we talked about how carbohydrates are also a fuel source. But the way that we use fats as a fuel source is during low intensity exercise and rest. So as we are sitting here hanging out listening, we are in a fat burning mode right now. If our insulin is low. We talked about insulin in that lecture where I talked about nutrition for optimal health. If our insulin is chronically high, then that impairs our ability to burn fat. So what keeps our insulin high would be high sugar, high carbohydrate diet. Also, we have organ protection. So, you carry a little bit of body fat that protects all the organs in your body. The vitamin absorption, so vitamins A, D, E, it benefits us to consume fat when we consume those vitamins because it increases our level of absorption for those. And then the makeup of our cell membranes, just like protein is responsible for helping build those structures, fat also plays a role in creating the cell membrane. The regulation of hormones. So that doesn't just mean like sex hormones. That means, we have so many hormones, guys. Like insulin is a hormone. You have human growth hormone, adrenaline, cortisol. All of these things are players in that, and fat is a big player in helping regulate those. So if we're not getting enough, we're going to start to see trouble in the regulation of our hormones. And then bile. So bile helps us break down fats, but it also helps us absorb vitamins. So there's some carryover there. And then I have trouble saying this word, eicosanoids. It's responsible for our inflammation levels and the signaling for our inflammation. So the recommended intake in general would be anywhere from 30 to 60% of your diet. It's going to depend on the individual though. So I know those of you who've been with us for a while, you understand the zone diet prescribes a 30% protein, 40% carbohydrate, 30% fat diet. And I would say for somebody that is metabolically flexible, that is a good direction to go in terms of how much fat. 30% is a good place to be. If we are metabolically inflexible, maybe we carry some excess body fat, or we have some metabolic markers that are deranged. So we have high blood pressure, diabetes, some other markers of potential heart disease like high triglycerides, then we may want to consider increasing the fat intake to something like 60% or somewhere in the neighborhood in between there. But it's really largely going to be dependent on the person and kind of what they have going on. So some of you that I've coached individually and kind of given that prescription out, it's based on you as an individual, what your activity level looks like, and your health overall. And sometimes blood markers come into play there. So again, we can go back to what these represent in terms of the different types, and you can see how that might fit into your diet daily. The ones that I've listed in red are going to be known as our polyunsaturated fats. They're highly processed, meaning they have to go through a significant level of processing to get there. I think the one that most commonly is used is going to be canola oil or vegetable oil. And because of the level of processing there, that increases our inflammation markers and can lead to some metabolic dysfunction. So while we're eating fats, we're trying to create a good balance of omega-3 to omega-6. And I'm sure that you guys have heard, in the Paleolithic this looked more like a 1-to-2 ratio. And in our Western diet now, it looks more like 1-to-20. So inflammation is generally very high, and that is largely part because we consume a lot more processed foods. And they have a collection of these found in those processed foods. So if you're reading labels and you see a few of these different oils listed in there, that is what creates that recipe for a little bit higher inflammation. When we're taking a blend of these from whole foods, we're less likely to see that, and it creates a little bit more balance here. So instead of seeing maybe 1-to-20, we're seeing 1-to-4, something like that. But we find this inside of like grass-fed meats or wild-caught fish, things like that. And then our dairy products, butter, lard, tallow, I think those things are becoming a little bit more popular. You're hearing about that more. But I want you to think about some of the processed foods, like even if we see, okay, Steak and Shake is going to start frying their fries in tallow. Well, that sounds all good and great. And you're like, oh yeah, like tallow, it's on the good list, it's a saturated fat. But what people have to remember is that if those fries were processed in some of these oils and then frozen, shipped to Steak and Shake, and now they're frying them in tallow, then we're kind of missing the point. And that's why I do encourage people to focus on whole foods, also cooking at home, because you don't leave it up to someone else to figure out what's in your food, and you don't miss all of these secret ingredients that are creeping in there and causing inflammation and other problems in your body. You can, cook your steak in grass-fed butter, your grass-fed steak in your grass-fed butter, and you can add your 100% olive oil to your salad. You have way more control at home than you do when you're sitting in a restaurant or buying something that's already prepackaged. Does that make sense for you guys?
Mm-hmm.
Any questions yet? Okay. So one of the other things I want to hit on is kind of what fat does for us. So we know why it's super important. And I think when we talk about if we don't get enough of it, we can start to see where some of these things fail. And just kind of going back to the hormones is a really easy one. Whenever we are eating enough protein, but we have high carbohydrates and we start to dip that fat down too low, like say we're trying to do a cut, we're cutting fat as in a form of cutting calories. Well, then we can start to see some of our hormones take a dip. Women can see loss of their menstrual cycle. And even whenever, you're getting into perimenopause, menopause phase, there's all these other sex hormones that are at play there. And if we're not getting enough fat to help regulate things can start to spiral pretty quickly. So it is super important. And I think some of you who have experimented with eating a higher fat diet, you've experienced higher satiety. So you stay fuller for longer and you have to rely less on snacking between meals. Your energy level is more sustained. So we're not experiencing a high blood sugar rise and then fall because of the carbohydrates that we're taking in, because that fat keeps us pretty even. It doesn't raise our blood sugar a lot. And then your increased fat burning, because your body gets used to running on fat as a fuel. So then whenever you run out of that consumed fat that you're burning, your body will then start to utilize the fat on your body as a fuel. Does that make sense for you guys? So those are kind of some of the benefits there. Now, if we're metabolically inflexible, we're dealing with some chronic health issues, the further into that 60% that we get, and then also, if say we're eating 30% protein and then we only have 10% left for carbs, that is a good way to retrain and reset the body to learn how to survive on the essentials, protein and fat, and then drop down the carbohydrates, which are causing some issues with blood sugar, blood pressure, all that stuff. So it retrains and resets the body to be able to run on fat. Then we start to see that fat loss, and then all the blood markers start to improve after that. There is a percentage of people that say, well, I have trouble digesting fat, maybe. I've had my gallbladder removed. And so that's always, not me, but that can be an issue for some people. But I want you to think about the types of fat you're consuming. If we're eating deep fried food and we don't have a gallbladder, that's going to create some issues for us. Yeah. And if you rely on your whole foods, you will experience less of an issue. And also, if you have some other metabolic issues and we need to be on the higher side in fat, you can slowly increase that to where it's not going to have such a harsh impact on the system. And then you can also supplement. So if you're missing an organ, you can then supplement with something like digestive enzymes, which can help break down the protein and fat that you're ingesting. And I do have recommendations for that, and they are animal-based. Mm-hmm. But that would help for somebody who's either missing a gallbladder or has a level of gallbladder dysfunction. Whenever we say more energy, so 1 gram, let me get a place to put this, 1 gram of fat is 9 calories.
I mean, calories are the unit of measurement that we use to measure energy. That's what it is. That's all it is, okay?
And then 1 gram of carbs is 4 calories. And 1 gram of protein is 4 calories.
Now, we brought this stuff up last month and kind of started to break down a daily caloric intake of approximately 2,000 calories for a person, and then showing you the percentage that might be consumed with fat consumed by carbohydrate intake and then with protein intake. And when you're coming up with somebody's stuff, you want to generally take the protein and fat intake as the two macronutrients that you want to measure out first. So for us, we take the protein intake as a baseline number. So if we know the athlete has 150 pounds of lean body mass on them, so we go 150 times 4, and that tells us how many calories they need to consume in a day of protein. Okay, that's part of the equation that we're looking to do. Stuff like MyFitnessPal and Chronometer take all that stuff into account for you, and they do the math for you.
And with this, you can see, okay, fat is double the energy per gram than the other two. So you could say quantity-wise, you consume less because you guys have all experienced the peanut butter thing. Whenever you get like a tablespoon of peanut butter, it contains a lot more fat than people realize. But also, the consumption of that, it takes more effort for your body to digest it. It's going to sit in the system a little bit longer. So that is what creates that fullness feeling. The energy is also what sustains you for a longer period of time. Like you could see, okay, visually, this is how this would sustain me energy-wise for much longer. Now, when we take processed foods into the equation and you have something like a Pop-Tart, it's going to be largely carbohydrates and fat. And the fat is generally going to come from these highly processed fats or like a hydrogenated oil.
And they're using that to bind the food together.
Right.
It's like glue.
It's also like a preservative too, so that the shelf life can last for months and months and months. Those things don't grow mold on them very quickly.
Yeah, if you're getting into the sourdough game, you will find out that the shelf life of something like sourdough bread is a fraction of what another bread.
A small fraction, like a 4-day fraction.
Yes.
As opposed to you could have a
Weeks.
loaf of bread there for a month without growing anything on there. So you can see where you'd want to
have the least processing as possible.
Mm-hmm.